Hi, my name is Melissa Trudinger and I'm one of the writers from the APA's In Motion magazine. I'm here with Associate Professor Michelle Smith from the University of Queensland at the Australian Sports Commission and Australian Institute of Sport Women in Sport Congress. Michelle, tell me a bit about yourself and why you're here.
So I'm an associate professor at the University of Queensland, but also a sports and exercise physiotherapist. A lot of my research and teaching is around, it's around supporting athletes, and I have a particular interest and focus on supporting adolescent athletes with a passion for female athletes as well.
Why do girls participate in sport?
One of the key things girls tell us about why they do sport, what they love about sport, is the social side of sport. They often start sport because they have friends playing sport, they've been invited to play with their friends and want to have that outside of school social activity with friends, or sometimes it's their siblings play or even their parents play. We had one person say, my whole family plays a sport, so of course I wanted to play too. So it's like a lot of that social aspect of sport that really attracts girls to it in the first place and that girls seem to enjoy when they're playing that. And interestingly, another thing girls told us was that once they start playing sport, they like to see those successes in sport, but that could just be things like, oh, I learned a new skill, or I got a personal best, or my team won. So, that kind of is that, I guess, fulfilling their enjoyment in sport as they participate.
What are the factors that are involved when girls drop out of sport?
There seem to be a number of factors about girls dropping out of sport, some that relate to things that affect their enjoyment, and then other things that relate to kind of logistical complications about doing sport. So things that they shared with us that affected their enjoyment in sport was oftentimes when they had friends that stopped playing sport, or when they moved into more competitive teams and teams are selected so they don't have a chance to play with friends anymore. So that compromising of the social interactions that they previously had in sport was one of the things that affected their enjoyment. But girls also talked about a lot of other factors like experiencing, unfortunately, poor player, parent, or coach behaviors is kind of generally what I would call it, I guess, where they felt excluded or didn't feel like that was a very cohesive environment anymore for them to be in. So that compromised that, a bit of that safety and a bit of that culture that they enjoyed in the first place. A lot of girls talked a lot about pressure and anxiety that they felt, and a lot of that was internally driven. And so they talk about, as they got into more competitive teams, that they didn't like the pressure that they felt to have to perform, or they would get really anxious, particularly girls. The anxiety came up a lot with girls who did individual sports, where they felt like, everyone's watching me, it's only me, it's up to me. And girls who made higher level sports, like national or state competitions, where it's that added pressure that caused a lot of anxiety for them to perform. But then the final thing about their enjoyment was a bit of girls seemed to compare themselves to peers and others, and that created a lot of self-doubt. So people would be saying, well, I'm not improving anymore, people are better than me, or I didn't make that team, and that made them doubt their ability in sport. All those factors kind of affected their enjoyment, and some of the key reasons why they stopped. But I guess the other element was logistics. One of the big things was actually timing and clashes caused, issues with continued participation. And girls talked about, well, I used to do a couple of sports, but I can't do those now because the training clashes or competitions clash. So they had to choose one or the other. And then the other element was school. So particularly as girls get into grade 11 and 12, they seem to reflect there was more pressure to do well in school. They had to change their focus to make sure they were performing well at school and get the best ATAR that they could. So that sometimes led them to say, well, I don't have time for sport because I have to focus on school.
What strategies can be used to improve retention of girls in sport then through adolescence?
Yeah, I think there's so many different things because it's so complicated, and with every person having different things they want out of sport. One of the things that came out a lot was with the social side of things is that girls felt that as they got older, there wasn't a lot of opportunity if they didn't want to be competitive. So they felt that you would try for teams, you'd be competitive, but if you wanted to play it at a social level, you have to actually drop back a lot of skill levels. So retaining girls in sport, they might need to probably need to look broader at what types of opportunities are available and making sure there are opportunities to match different personalities and goals and stuff of the girls playing in them. And then I think there's other things like, I know sport tries to do this a lot, is that almost like that addressing behavior that might compromise that, the social element and that camaraderie and that teamwork. I think there's probably a lot that maybe needs to be more discussed openly about the pressure, the self-doubt, and the anxiety. I think that's probably got more attention in elite sport, but a lot of the girls that we've talked to, we had a mix of girls who participate at national level, state level, and more local regional level. And anxiety was throughout all of those levels. So perhaps more conversations about, dealing with pressure and dealing with anxiety and more perspectives about you're not always going to improve maybe, or you might not make a team this round, but these are things you can work on for next round. So kind of setting the scene a bit more that they understand where they're at and maybe helping them build that resilience and build that, I guess, planning for future rather than stopping.
What's the sort of role that a physiotherapist can play in helping to keep girls in sport?
It depends where we work in physiotherapy, obviously, but if we're seeing people who are injured, then I think it's really important for us to recognize that sport has both physical aspects and social aspects. And so an injury might limit somebody from fully doing all the physical aspects of a sport, but might not limit them from being involved socially in that sport, in terms of like seeing their team, spending time with friends, being involved in whatever capacity they can. And I guess adding to that, girls talked about in the interviews we did with them that when they were injured, they felt like an outsider. And they no longer had the opportunity to see friends that they didn't go to school with. So they're feeling they were losing those connections. And so as physiotherapists, I think it's really important that we talk to girls, that we ensure that whatever we're doing to manage any injuries, that we incorporate them with that team still and we incorporate them in their sport. And that can be simply like they go to trainings and maybe they only go to the team meetings and help run some drills but can't play to start with. Maybe they can do warm up in some selected parts of the training. Maybe then they can progress to full training. So I think thinking about the way that we can ensure we're keeping girls involved with their team so they don't feel like that outsider and then lose that compassion and lose that connection with their team that might lead to dropout. And so we know that a lot of girls experience pressure, anxiety, and self-doubt during sport, even when they're not injured. But this can sometimes be escalated when girls are returning to sport after an injury, that they're nervous about their ability, that they may not have been as much involved in the team for a period of time. So I think physios have to be or should really consider how they can talk to their patients about dealing with anxiety about returning to sport, dealing with them questioning their ability, and whether that's looking at specific assessments of those elements like return to sport readiness, and addressing that as part of the rehabilitation to make sure that we're looking at both the physical capacity to return to sport, but also a lot of those mental and social capacities to return to sport as well.
Thanks, Michelle. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to chat with me about your research.
No problem.